Once one pressed its nose to the grating, while I was still entering my access code. I noticed it the way you notice a shadow moving at the edge of your vision. A flicker of pale luminescence, two slit-pupiled eyes at approximately elbow height, a soft kittenous click as the cub shifted its weight against the mesh. I glanced over. It stared back. Then I pulled up Manifest Screen 14 and got on with my work. That was how it started. Let me be clear about what the Keth'ara impound pen looked like when I arrived on Ledris Station's lower annex that morning. 3 handlers in full containment suits, sealed visors, elbow-length gauntlets, the kind of gear you'd wear to handle a live power conduit, stood at the far end of the room with their backs pressed to the wall. One had a bandaged forearm. The other 2 hadn't been near the pen at all since the previous shift, according to the incident log I'd pulled before coming down. The pen itself was rated for Apex-class living cargo, double mesh walls, pressure seals on the feeding slot, a sedation delivery system routed through the ventilation that the station director had so far declined to activate because, quote, the conclave observer is watching our methods. 6 Keth'ara cubs confiscated from a trafficking vessel 3 days prior, each one roughly the size of a large house cat, feline in their basic layout, 4 legs, 2 forward set eyes, flexible spine, but with chitinous plates across the shoulders and hindquarters that caught the light like oil on dark water, and a row of retractable quills along the dorsal ridge that the xenobiology officer, a narrow man named Voss, had informed me could puncture standard issue station, plating at close range. Their mother, the dam, was in the heavy containment hold 2 bulkheads over. I had not seen the dam. I had read the incident report describing the dam, which used the phrase catastrophic structural engagement to describe what she'd done to the loading frame when they brought her aboard, and I had decided that was enough information for now. I was there to catalog the manifests. Living contraband required cross-index documentation for conclave review, species classification, capture provenance, health assessment logs, projected resale value, chain of custody from seizure to disposition, paperwork, my particular skill set. I set my case down next to the terminal station, 3 feet from the pen's outer wall, and I started working. The cub at the grating did not move away. I gave it approximately the same attention I give the service drones that bump against my chair, which is, to say, none. I was on page 4 of the provenance records when I heard Voss make a sound behind me that I can only describe as a suppressed shriek, and I turned to find that 2 more cubs had relocated from the far corner of the pen to the wall nearest my terminal. They sat in a neat row, watching me with those luminous slit eyes, their shoulder plates faintly clicking as they breathed. You should, Voss started. Move? Why? Turned back to the manifest. They don't do that. They've been reactive to every person who's entered this bay. Handler Prenny is still on medical. I'm not touching anything, I said. I'm entering data. Voss did not have a good answer to that. I heard him retreat to the doorway. The 3 armored handlers stayed against the far wall. The cubs stayed at the grating near my elbow. By the end of that first shift, all 6 had migrated. They were piled against the inner mesh in a loose formation. The biggest one, which had a slightly asymmetric set of quills that made it look permanently skeptical, claimed the spot directly level with my right hand. The others arranged themselves in a rough arc around it, facing outward except when they were watching me, which was most of the time. Voss filed an incident report. I filed my manifests. Neither of us mentioned it to the other. I came back the second shift because the provenance documentation was incomplete, and I said so to the station director, who looked relieved to have a reason to send someone competent into the annex. The armored handlers were technically assigned to accompany me. In practice, they stood near the door, the skeptical cub. I had started thinking of it as docket privately, because it always looked like it was reviewing my work and finding it adequate. Was at the grating before I'd finished booting the terminal. Sat down, it settled. Somewhere behind its shoulder plates, a low sound began, less a purr than a continuous low vibration, like a power relay running at idle. I was 3 lines into the health assessment cross-reference when I felt a small weight land on my left shoulder. I went still for exactly 2 seconds. The weight shifted, adjusted, and settled into place with the particular satisfaction of something that has found the correct position and intends to stay there. I turned my head slowly and found myself eye to eye with one of the smaller cubs, pale-plated, eyes like lit copper, currently wrapping its forelegs around the top of my shoulder and beginning to groom one of its own quills with a tongue, the color of river clay. I thought about it for a moment. Then I went back to the health assessments because provenance documentation wasn't going to file itself, and the cub on my shoulder, after testing the weight of my collar with one chitinous forepaw, settled down and went to sleep. Voss, when he found us 40 minutes later, made a sound I cannot reproduce in writing. "It's sleeping," I told him. "I can see that sleeping," he said, at a volume that suggested he was trying very hard not to shout. It picked the spot I didn't encourage it. Marin. That animal put Handler Pren in the medical bay. Handler Pren was trying to separate it from the others with a prod, I said. I'd read the report.
Just doing data entry.
Voss retreated to his console and began typing very rapidly. I assumed he was filing more incident reports. The cub slept. Docket and the remaining 4 maintained their formation at the grating, and at some point the 3 of them nearest the mesh began the low vibration as well, so that the whole pen hummed at a frequency I felt more than heard, like sitting next to a very large, very calm engine. That was also the shift when they started bringing me things. It began with one of the enrichment items Voss had introduced into the pen, a dense, foam cylinder intended to provide the cubs with something to exercise their quills on. Docket picked it up, carried it to the feeding slot, pushed it through with a deliberateness that I found hard to interpret as anything other than intentional. It landed on the floor next to my boot. I looked at it. Docket looked at me. I picked it up, turned it over, set it on the edge of my terminal. Docket appeared satisfied. By the end of the shift, there were 4 enrichment items. A handler's glove that had somehow found its way into the pen during the previous rotation. I did not investigate how. And 1 station rat, stunned, which Docket deposited through the feeding slot with the gravity of a formal presentation, and which I relocated to a specimen container because it was still breathing. And Voss was going to have enough to document already. The cub on my shoulder woke up when I stood to leave, regarded me with sleepy copper eyes, and allowed itself to be transferred to the top of the terminal station, with a dignity that suggested this was entirely its own idea. Came back the 3rd shift, because the disposition records were still a mess. And I'm being honest here, I wanted to see if it would happen again. It did. Broker Hesseldren arrived on the 3rd shift. I'd seen his name in the provenance chain, the original buyer, dispossessed when the trafficking vessel was seized, now pressing a recovery claim through 3 different legal instruments and apparently winning, enough of them to be on station in person. He was a large man, wide in the shoulder, wearing a coat that was clearly expensive, and clearly intended to communicate that fact. He had 2 associates with him, who stood the way people stand when they are paid to look threatening. He took one look at the annex, at the cubs, stacked against the mesh near my terminal, at the one currently arranged on my left knee like a small, spined, deeply asleep decorative object, and his face went through several expressions in rapid succession. "What," he said, "is that civilian doing in the pen area?" "Data entry," I said, without looking up. "These animals are under recovery claim. They shouldn't be anywhere near. Who authorized?" He turned to Voss, who had the expression of a man watching a navigation error compound in real time. "Get her away from the pen right now." "The animals have demonstrated a marked preference for," Voss began. "I don't care about their preferences. Get her away." He crossed the room in 4 strides and put his hand on my arm. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, and I want to be precise about the sequence, because Voss's incident report got 2 details wrong. The cubs at the grating went silent. Not calm, silent. There is a difference. And if you've ever been in the same room as a large predator that has stopped making noise, you know exactly what that difference feels like. Every one of them was on its feet. The one on my knee was on its feet. The one that had been asleep at the corner of the terminal was on its feet. Their quills were fully extended. I'd never seen them fully extended before, and I want to note for the record that the xenobiology assessment had significantly underestimated the diameter. Second, the sound that came through the bulkhead was not, as Voss wrote, A structural irregularity in the heavy containment hold. It was the dam. The dam hit the wall between her hold and the annex, with something that was not quite a roar, and not quite a scream, but contained elements of both, and also something that I do not have a word for, a frequency that I felt in my back teeth and my sternum simultaneously. The lights flickered. Seam appeared in the bulkhead plating that had not been there before. Drant let go of my arm. He did this very quickly. Third. And this is the part Voss's report missed entirely. Dockett looked at Drant for a long moment, then turned and looked at me, and then made a sound that was much quieter than the dam, almost conversational in register, and lay back down. The rest of them lay back down. The one on my knee lay back down. I straightened my sleeve, picked up my stylus, and went back to the disposition records. Drant stood in the middle of the room for a moment that I imagine felt quite long to him. Behind him, I heard the station director's voice. She'd come in during the dam's greeting, apparently, and beside her, the conclave observer who had been monitoring methodology. Both of them were looking at the seam in the bulkhead plating. "Broker Drant," the station director said, in the tone of someone choosing words with significant care. "I'd like you to come with me to my office." I heard him leave. I heard his associates leave behind him. I did not look up. Voss sat down at his console with the slowness of a man whose legs have stopped taking instructions from his brain. After a moment he said, quietly, "They would have gone through the mesh." "I know," I said. "If he hadn't let go, I know." I finished the disposition block, saved the file, and started on the chain of custody addendum. The cub on my knee made a small adjustment, tucked its nose under my wrist, and went back to sleep. Dockett resumed the low vibration. The others picked it up, one by one, until the pen was humming again at that deep idle frequency. The station director came back 40 minutes later to inform me, with a careful neutrality, that broker Drant's recovery claim had been referred to the Conclave Trade Commission for review, given procedural irregularities in the original acquisition documentation, and that his collection license had been provisionally suspended pending investigation. She looked at the cub on my knee when she said it. "He's not getting them," I said. I'd phrased it as a question in my head, but it came out as a statement, and she didn't correct it. "We'll need a disposition recommendation from the assigned contractor," she said, "regarding long-term custody arrangements." I looked at the manifest still open on my terminal. Then I looked at Dockett, who was looking back at me with that expression of critical review I'd come to think of as its default setting. "Give me until end of shift," I said. "I'll have it documented." She left. Voss waited until her footsteps faded down the corridor, then turned from his console and said, with the air of a man who has spent 3 shifts writing incident reports and has arrived at a conclusion, been consulting the xenobiology literature, "There's a designation for this." "For what?" "For when a Keth'ara litter selects a non-conspecific as a primary anchor figure. It's in the old survey records. Pre-conclave, tier-era documentation." He pulled something up on his screen. They called it Anchor Protocol, the Behavior Cluster, the Migration to Proximity, Tribute Deposition, the Defensive Response to Perceived Threats against the Anchor. He paused. "I'm going to put it in the formal log, as a classification." I looked at the stunned station rat I'd moved to the specimen container 3 shifts ago. I looked at the foam cylinder and the handler's glove still sitting on the edge of my terminal. I looked at the cub asleep on my knee, the slight rise and fall of its chitinous shoulder plates, the small retracted quills resting flat against its spine. "Fine," I said. "Log it however you need to." I filed the disposition records at the end of the shift. Recommended long-term custody, contracted civilian oversight, pending species welfare assessment with the notation that relocation should be considered structurally inadvisable given observed dam behavior and the current condition of the bulkhead between annex and heavy containment hold. The station director approved it before I'd reached the corridor. I went home, slept 6 hours, and came back in the morning. The cubs were waiting at the grating. Dockett had its chin on the lower bar and its eyes half closed, drowsy, not asleep. And when it heard my access code, it lifted its head and made that low vibration sound, and the others picked it up. And by the time I sat down at my terminal, the pen was humming. I pulled up the morning's manifests. There were 17 new files from the overnight seizure run, and the provenance chains were, predictably, a disaster. I got to work. Behind me, in the heavy containment hold, the dam was quiet. All the paperwork said so. I believed the paperwork because I had written it myself, and because behind the mesh, 6 pairs of luminous slit eyes were watching me work, and none of them were worried at all.